Hello and welcome to Eco-Terrorism. I'm Zainab Beyloun. While experts unanimously agree that carbon emissions need to decrease, the standard consensus is that greenhouse gas emissions need to be dramatically reduced by 80% by the year 2050 in order to starve off climate disaster. The only problem, however, is the global economy, which runs on fossil fuels, which release massive quantities of carbon. The factories that produce all the goods, the ships and trucks that carry it around the world, our cars, buildings, and appliances, and nearly everything we take for granted are all a product or result of a process involving vast quantities of carbon emissions. Just how is it possible to reach these idyllic levels of carbon emissions in time for the continued perseverance of mankind? Perhaps the most debated solution to this problem is the project of cap and trade, a controversial process of trading carbon pollution. Today's episode works to reveal the efficiency of cap and trade, its failings, and its staying power for the future. Here's how carbon trading works.
The emission trading scheme determines how much CO2 and other greenhouse gases we can emit. In 1997, most of the countries in the world signed the Kyoto Protocol. The aim of this agreement is that all industrialized countries should reduce their total emissions of greenhouse gases by at least 5% from 2008 to 2012, compared to their emissions in 1990. The UN distributes quotas of carbon units to those industrialized countries that have signed the treaty. These units set a limit on the level of emissions. This limit is equivalent to the total amount of CO2 that these countries are permitted to emit, and which is less than the anticipated emissions. Some countries are so successful in reducing their emissions that they simply don't need all the carbon units they've been allocated, while other countries may struggle to reduce their emissions and need more units. Countries may, therefore, buy and sell carbon units. The price of tradable units depends on how many there are in circulation. Similar to a stock exchange, prices vary according to supply and demand. Each country is individually responsible for deciding how to cut its emissions. Heavy industry is often responsible for a large share of a country's CO2 emissions. Many countries have therefore decided that these industries must make the largest contribution towards emission reductions. Let's look at an example. Factory A and B have both been allocated carbon units by their authorities. Factory A decides to reduce its emissions by implementing climate-friendly measures. Their reduction efforts are in fact so successful that they have carbon units to spare. These can then be sold. Factory B, on the other hand, is unable to reduce its emissions and has to buy carbon units, from Factory A, for instance. However, Factory B can also cover its emissions by investing in CO2 reducing measures in Factory C, which is located in a developing country. Although this country does not have any obligations under the Kyoto Protocol, the UN can still approve the emission reductions and give Factory B carbon units equivalent to the reductions in Factory C. So, regardless of whether Factory B buys units from Factory A or C, the result is reduced emissions.
Welcome back. Today we have with us in the studio Souheil Abboud, Director of V4 Advisors, an environmental advisory and project development company specialized in the field of emission reduction. Thank you, Souheil, for being with us today.
Thank you.
So if we're going to start with a kind of general question just about your company and what you do specifically concerning carbon emissions reduction.
V4 Advisors is a new company. I've set this company up in January of this year. Obviously, I do have a lot of experience in the emission trading and emission development systems. The purpose of V4 Advisors is really to focus on providing online solutions to companies in the Middle East. We're currently focused on Lebanon, but very quickly we're going to go to the rest of the GCC, whereby we will be providing these online platforms that will allow companies to take control over their environmental, primarily greenhouse gas emissions, monitoring and reporting. So we're one of the first companies to get international certification We've taken
in the Middle East specifically,
in the Middle East.
Okay.
We've taken what is relatively a complex topic to a lot of companies, and we've simplified it down to a point where literally anybody in the company can use these platforms and use them for internal monitoring, reporting, government reporting, as well as internal communication and external communication. We have a very nice webpage, v4advisors.com, so it's extremely self-explanatory.
So how successful has this been so far, especially in considering it's such a difficult place to work in?
It's been very successful. We've done a lot of work so far, a lot of policy support work for the UNDP here in Lebanon. The clients that have signed up to use our platforms are relatively big companies here in the country.
Can you give some examples?
Of course we can. We've got a major catering company called Cat and Mouth. They're one of the leading catering companies in the country. They're using this because it's important to them. Just before we give a bit of examples, it's important to kind of state why do companies audit their carbon footprint? Why do they have a carbon management strategy? There are many reasons to doing that, and all combined will come up with a carbon management strategy. Some will do it for marketing reasons, some will do it for internal communication, external communication, energy efficiency to eventually become carbon neutral, link it with cost effectiveness, especially when implementing energy efficiency measures. So Cat and Mouth is a company that we work with. Workwear Basic is another company. Hotel Royal in Beirut, in Baye actually, is another company. We've got Schneider. We've got other companies that seek to audit their carbon footprint for many reasons.
So if we look at kind of the issue of the criticisms of emissions trading reduction, specifically what should be done to reduce carbon emissions in general, do you think that, say if we talk about cap and trade or other types of ways of reducing carbon emissions, is there a specific way that would be the best to deal with this issue, or is this something that is kind of depending on the area that we're looking at, or the region, or the company, or the country?
Well, when we talk about emission trading, it's a big topic. When we start talking about what needs to be done, I think the basics is to think about the radical changes we need to do. Let's just talk in general, and then we'll give
societies, or
as societies, as companies, economies, governments, and what have you.
So you do think that a radical change is more necessary?
It is necessary, but let me elaborate a little bit about it. Today, when we talk about radical changes, we're talking about really how we live our lives, how we conduct our business as usual scenarios. So in order to achieve a global reduction in greenhouse gases, as much as preserve the resources that we have, because talking about greenhouse gases is not simply a pollution, it's also, from an energy perspective, it's really how do we preserve our natural resources. So when we talk about energy trading schemes or climate change policies, it is a necessary first step that we had to take in order to literally build the infrastructure for the greenhouse gas emission industry. Did it work? It didn't work. You get a million views and a million perspective on that. But to put it in a simplified manner, and really to get to answer your question, if we oversimplify it and segment the economies that we have globally, you could really put them into three categories. One are the poor economies, the non-industrialized economies. These are clean from a greenhouse gas perspective because they don't do much. As these economies grow, they move into becoming rich or already rich. And this is when they start becoming dirty, because unfortunately economic indices become far more important than environmental issues. So we start talking about GDPs, FDIs, and what have you, all on the expense of the environment, simply to grow. And then when these economies mature, they start moving into what is known as rich but clean. And this is what we have in Japan, North America, Europe, Australia.
Do they have to necessarily go through that stage of being dirty countries?
That's what's happening. I think you can skip. That's really not happening, but the majority of these economies are taking that path. We see, to give a simple example, Southeast Asia and China are taking that path. They went from literally small economies to a very large economy very quickly, where the focus has been on growth as opposed to environment. Now you see there's a big shift into, becoming green and becoming rich, at the same time becoming more efficient, far more environmentally responsible, socially responsible, and sustainable. Sustainable development is becoming extremely important. So that's really, if you want to take a look at it. And the second important point is whether we believe scientists are telling us something that we want to believe, and that is we really don't have much time. The reductions that everybody's talking about are significant, whether it's 50% or 80%, these are very, very large numbers. So the question is, if we believe them, then we have to collaborate, not just as industrialized economies, but also everybody has a share in this, the growing, the emerging economies, the developing economies, even the least developed economies. So, and if you want to quantify this and talk about these radical changes that you're asking about, we can look at a sector, and that is the oil and gas sector, for example. You've got associated gas that is currently flared or vented, and the emissions from the global vented and flared associated gas is significant. It's estimated to be over 400 billion tons of carbon dioxide each year that's being put into our atmosphere. This is a very significant number. And if we look at it from an energy perspective, we can equate those numbers into something. The amount of associated gas that's currently being flared equates to 25% of the US's gas consumption, to 30% of the EU's gas consumption, to the entire consumption of Central and South America. So these are very large numbers. It equates to 75% of Russia's export of gas. In Africa alone, you've got 1.2 trillion cubic feet of gas that's being flared, which is equal to around 50% of the continent's gas consumption. So if we take radical changes in an industry that's relatively mature through proper policies and incentives, you will be able to, as I said, avoid 400 million or even more of CO2 emissions into our atmosphere. So that's what we talk about, radical changes, I think.
Sounds great. We'll be off for a short break. Stay tuned. Okay, so we just heard about the report and what it had to say about cap and trade specifically and these different issues. So can you tell us about emissions trading and the argument that it doesn't actually work in practice? What do you think of this?
Well, let's get one fact, in my opinion. If we agree on one fact, that there is no one single policy, regulation, incentive, call it whatever you want to call it, that's going to create significant reduction into our global greenhouse gas emissions.
No current policy or theoretically?
I'm just talking in theory, in general.
Okay.
There's nothing, not one single thing that's just going to be it, and it's going to help us achieve these dramatic changes that we anticipate. So if we look at the emission trading, it's a tool. It was designed to penalize heavy emitters, and it was designed also to give incentive to clean energies, clean economies to excel. So with that, some would say that it has succeeded, some would say it hasn't succeeded. Again, that is a very big debate, and you get many perspectives on it.
What's your personal opinion?
But I'm getting to my personal opinion, but let's give a couple of examples. If you look at the EU has basically introduced a number of incentives, rules and regulations and what have you, up to a point where they've actually put the high polluting industries in a position where they need to either close down because they became too expensive, or take dramatic measures into improving the energy efficiency and be able to be competitive in the global European and global market. So these are the successes. Now, if we take that and basically say, what is the definition of emission trading, and what are the projections, and what do we expect from emission trading? If you simply say that it was designed to basically engage people, companies, economies, governments, to reduce without putting strict restrictions on them, then basically emission trading has successfully done its job. Mm-hmm. If you're in a camp where you are expected, or you had expected emission trading to have significant reduction, then maybe your expectations were too high, and therefore the emission trading schemes have failed you. So my personal perspective, and I will give you that from my personal experience, throughout the period of 2000-2005, I was working and living in Asia, in Southeast Asia specifically, where I was developing a large number of renewable energy or clean energy projects. And without emission trading schemes, whether on the voluntary basis and or compliance basis, without these schemes, a big chunk of these projects would have never materialized if we didn't have the financial means through these emission trading schemes to fund these projects. These projects were not only excellent from a greenhouse gas perspective, they had enormous benefits from a sustainable development perspective, local employment, local growth to the economies, communities, and what have you. So
it really all depends on your expectations, basically.
To me, it's not only on your expectations, it's on the global expectations. Let's remember, emission trading was put to engage people as an initial step. It was put to build the infrastructure for for the greenhouse gas emission industry.
But it's not meant to be the final goal or the final structure.
Definitely not. We're only literally starting to scratch the surface, in my opinion. There's a lot more to come. There's just really, this is step one. So.
And how do you think we can move forward, or we should move forward?
Moving forward,
would it be taking more extreme stances, at least on the part of the government? Do you think the government should take firmer stances, or do you think it's just something that will come with time?
I'm of the opinion that let the market take its toll. If you engage the governments, and we still talk, obviously we're moving to talk about taxes and carbon taxes. The minute you go into that segment, then basically you're allowing governments to define your price of carbon, and with that comes a big risk, because in my opinion people are willing to pay to pollute, and we're not talking about people as much as we're talking about industries, corporations. So an open market where let the market defines what the cost of pollution is will stem, in my opinion, innovation. It will allow the green technologies to penetrate markets. Like take our part of the world, for example. We look at our emissions. Let's talk specifically, since we're in Lebanon. According to the Second National Communication, the 50% of our emissions are from the energy sector, 20% of our emissions are from the transport sector. And this applies to all the GCC countries and the Arab states. What are we doing? What dramatic changes are we taking, policies and what have you, in order to incentivize people to buy hybrid cars, electric cars, in order to change from the conventional gasoline to LPGs? The infrastructure is not there. There's actually a disincentivization going on to buy a car. If you buy an electric car here, it's not even registered as a vehicle, it's registered as a machine, so you can literally not drive it on the road. So in order to achieve this, I think the market needs to allow innovation to take its toll, and allow the free market economy to set a price on emissions and pollution.
And what role do you think companies like yours have in all of this, and kind of moving forward? And
in this part of the world, we have, I think, communicating the benefits and educating is a big chunk of what we do. Our platforms, our services, our carbon management strategy, our policy work with the UNDP, that's all great for companies that understand what we're talking about. And there's quite a lot that understand what we're talking about. But at the other on the other side, we still have a lot of companies, even governments, that are not up to speed on this industry and the benefits of this industry, not only, again, from a climate change perspective, as much as it is from growth, economical growth and sustainable development perspective. So, you know, what we need to do is be far more aggressive with support from multilateral donors to go out and talk more about what we do. We need companies and organizations like the World Resource Institute to support companies like us in their certification, to give us international credibility, so that when we go to these local, whether small, big or medium-sized companies, they would feel that we know what we're talking about and we're certified by international. We're more recognized, definitely. So we have more credibility. So we're working hard with the support and the educational system, I think, that we need to promote in this part of the world. We will be in a much better shape. So.
As a kind of final question, do you see a positive future for the world, for the environment, in terms of carbon emissions?
Definitely. I think, as I said earlier, we're only scratching the surface. There's a lot more to come.
And we will move forward, upwards,
definitely.
Positively.
I think I'm very positive. It's a shame that we've missed, the Arab states have missed on the clean development mechanism, which ran on your movie. We have barely benefited from it from a financial perspective. Other mechanisms are coming into play. We have NAMAs that is very seriously considered right now. Governments are talking about it. They're taking real actions towards it. Governments are talking about low carbon economies. This is something that's very new in this part of the world. We see governments taking commitments to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions. We see them taking commitments in the COP meeting, the Conference of the Parties meetings, making commitment to increase their installed capacity by installing renewable energy instead of conventional. So I think we're definitely on the right track, and emission trading is here to stay. So.
Thank you. Thank you very much for being here with us today. This was Mr.Souheil Abboud. Those watching can check out more information about V4 Advisors on their website at www.v4advisors.com. I'm Zainab Bailoun, and this was Eco-Terrorism. See you next week.